Frost came early that year to Oldham Hollow, and it came the way frost always came there, quiet and thorough, silvering the hedgerows before the sun was up to see it happen. The village smelled of wood smoke and wet stone, and, nearer the saddlery, of leather and neatsfoot oil, and the particular sweetish rot of old harness waiting to be mended. Hester Calloway knew that smell the way other women knew the smell of their own kitchens. She had grown up inside it. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Not ugly, not pretty enough for anyone to remark on it either way, 25 years old with a saddler's daughter's hands, chapped and sure, and always faintly stained at the fingertips. Her father had been dead 3 years. The shop had gone to a cousin who did not want it, and did not want her in it, and so she mended what harness and tack the big houses sent down, for pennies, sitting at the window where the light was best, and she told herself that was enough, because it had to be. She had one competence, and she trusted it the way other people trusted God. She could read a strap the way a physician read a pulse. She could run 2 fingers along a length of leather in the dark and tell you where it would fail before it failed, where the fibres had dried and cracked under the surface polish, where a stitch had been set wrong and was working itself loose one ride at a time. Her father had taught her that before he taught her her letters. Leather does not lie, he used to say. It only waits to tell the truth. By nightfall the whole county would be talking about the Duke of Farley's new horse. She did not know that yet. She did not know that before the week was out she would be the reason he kept it, and kept his neck along with it, and she would never once ask him to remember her for it. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. The horse had come up from the coast 3 weeks before, a dapple grey stallion the Duke's agent had bought at auction, for a sum that made the innkeeper repeat it twice, disbelieving his own mouth. The county had gone to see him the way the county went to see anything new and expensive. Farmers leaned on the paddock rail of a Sunday. Children were held up over the fence to look. The stallion had a way of standing very still, and watching everyone watch him, ears pricked, as though he understood himself to be admired and found the arrangement satisfactory. Hester had not gone to see him. She had gone, instead, on the Tuesday, because the housekeeper at Farley Court had sent down a saddle girth with a note asking could it be mended by Thursday, the Duke meaning to ride the new horse out with the hunt that week and wanting his own tack fit rather than borrowed. She had walked the 2 miles up from the village with the girth rolled under her arm, and she had let herself into the stable yard by the side gate, the way she always did, because nobody minded her, because nobody much noticed her at all. The stable at Farley Court was a long stone building with a smell of its own, hay and horse and leather and coal smoke drifting down from the groom's fire, and under it all, faint, the mineral cold of the stone itself. Hester liked that smell better than any other she knew. She stood a moment in the doorway just to have it. The boy who kept the end stalls was called Tam. He was perhaps 12, small for his age, with the kind of watchful quiet that children got when they had learned early that the world did not owe them softness. He was an orphan, too, taken on at Farley Court out of the parish 2 winters back, and he did the work of a man twice his age because there was no one to say he should not. He was currying the grey stallion when Hester came in, working the brush in long, careful strokes, and he looked up at her, with the particular relief of a child glad to see a face that had never once been unkind to him. "Miss Calloway," he said. "You've come for the girth." "I have," she said. "Is he settled, then, your grand new gentleman?" "Grand enough," he said. "Bites if you're careless with the girth strap." Groom Silas says he's got a mean streak in him, same as any horse worth the money." She smiled at that, a small dry thing, and set her bag down on the mounting block, and got to the business of the girth she had brought, threading new stitching along a seam that had begun to fray at the buckle. She worked slowly and well, the way she worked at everything, and the stable settled around her into its evening rhythm, buckets and hay, and the soft stamp of hoofs on straw. And she did not think of herself as watched, because she never did, because there had never in her life been reason to. It was the tack hanging on the wall pegs that caught her eye, not the mended girth in her lap. The other one. The stallion's own saddle girth, the good one, hung ready for the morning's ride with the hunt, oiled and buckled and looking. To any eye that did not know leather the way Hester Calloway knew leather, entirely sound. She did not know why she reached for it. She told herself after, many times, that it was only habit, the same habit that made her run her thumb along any strap within, reach the way another woman might straighten a picture on a wall. She lifted it down and turned it in the last of the daylight coming through the high window, and her fingers found it before her eyes did. The strap had been cut, not worn through. Cut, with something fine and deliberate, most of the way across the width of it, on the underside where it lay against the horse's belly, and no eye glancing over the tack from above would ever think to look. What remained holding was a hair's width of leather, and the polish rubbed carefully back over the cut edge, so that it would pass any ordinary look. It would hold, she understood, at a walk. It would hold, perhaps, at a trot. It would not hold at a gallop, not over a hedge, not with a big man's weight thrown forward into a jump, and the hunt rode hard over broken ground with ditches that could break a horse's leg and a rider's neck both at once. She stood very still. "Tam," she said, "who tacked this one last?" Tam came and looked where she was looking, and his face went the colour of the whitewash on the wall, because he understood before she told him what he was looking at, understood in the particular sick way of a boy who has been taught his whole short life that blame falls where it is convenient and not where it is deserved. "I did," he said. "I tacked him this morning for exercise. I checked it, Miss Calloway. I swear before God I checked it." She looked at his hands, which were shaking, and she looked at the strap in her own hands, which were not. "I believe you," she said. She did not know then that a man was standing in the shadow of the loft ladder at the far end of the stable, still in the plain coat and rough boots of a hired groom, and had been standing there long enough to hear every word of it. She did not know that he had come down from the house not an hour before, unannounced and unrecognised even by half his own staff, to watch his stable the way a man watches a thing he has been told, in an unsigned letter slid under his study door a fortnight past, that he cannot trust. She did not know that the letter had said only this: "Someone near you means you harm, and you will not find him by asking who hates you. You will find him by watching who is kind when they believe you are not looking." She did not know any of it. She only knew that a boy who could be dismissed without a character for a fault that was not his own was standing in front of her shaking, and that the hunt rode out at first light. She sent Tam for a lantern and told him to say nothing to anyone, not Silas, not the steward, not a soul, because a boy accused of careless tacking on a duke's new horse would be turned off Farley Court by nightfall, whether or not the fault was ever proven his, and there would be no one troubling to prove it either way. Then she sat down on the mounting block with her own bag of thread and her own strip of good leather, the piece she had been saving 3 months for a girth of her own she meant to sell at market. And she cut it to length, and she began, in the near dark, by lantern light, to build a splice that would hold. She did not sign it. She did not tell Silas, who came in twice grumbling about the cold and never once looked twice at the girth on the wall. Because why would he? Because nobody suspects the thing that is already hanging where it is meant to hang. She worked until her fingers ached with cold, and her eyes ached with the lantern's poor light. And when she was done, the strap held true along its whole length, and no eye but hers, or a saddler's eye, would ever know it had been anything but sound. She rolled her own mended girth into her bag, unfinished business for another day, and she told Tam to go to his bed and say nothing, and she walked the 2 miles home in the dark with her hands raw and her mind entirely on the boy's shaking face, and not once, not for a single step of the road, on being seen, or thanked, or known. She did not know then that the man in the shadow of the loft ladder had watched her hands the whole time, and had not once, in 8 months of holding a dukedom he had not wanted, and did not entirely trust, seen anything that told him more truly who a person was. The hunt rode out at first light 2 days later, delayed a day for weather, and the grey stallion carried the Duke of Farleigh over 4 miles of broken ground and 11 fences without a stumble, and the whole county said afterward that they had never seen a finer animal go so true, and not one soul among them knew that the girth holding the Duke to that horse's back had been cut through by a man's hand and mended by a woman's, and that the second hand had saved the first, without once meaning to be found out for it. Hester heard the talk of it in the village same as everyone, how well the new horse had gone, how the Duke himself had said not a word about it after, grave as ever, thanking no one in particular for anything in particular. She thought nothing more of it. She had done what any saddler's daughter would have done, she told herself, and there was an end to it, and she went back to mending harness at her window where the light was best, and did not think herself owed a single word for it. She was wrong about that, though she would not learn how wrong for some weeks yet. The man who had stood in the shadow of the loft ladder was named Julian Voss, and he had been Duke of Farleigh for 8 months. Since his uncle's death had put a title on him he had spent 30 years assuming would never come, his uncle having a son of his own once, a boy dead of a fever at 9 years old, and never replaced. Julian had grown up the poor cousin's poor cousin, 3 degrees removed from any expectation of consequence, and he had learned early the particular clarity that comes to a man who is never courted for his rank, because he has none. He had a hard, plain face, a nose that had been broken once in a fall from a horse, and set a little crooked, and eyes the colour of strong tea, watchful, rarely warm. He smiled seldom and laughed less, and the people who knew him best said this was not coldness in him, but a kind of permanent thinking, as though some part of him were always doing sums that never quite came out even. He had been betrothed once, in his cousin's shadow, to a woman named Cordelia Ashe, who wept beautifully at the smallest provocation, and had once, in front of him, boxed a housemaid's ears for spilling tea on a hem. He had broken it off within the month, and he had not trusted a pretty face or a soft word since, not from anyone, not from a woman, not from his own blood. His own blood was the trouble now. His cousin Edmund Voss stood next in the entail, a cold, correct, handsome man who had spent 8 months making it plain, in the particular language of men who never quite say the thing they mean, that he considered the dukedom wasted on a man who had not been raised to it. The unsigned letter had come a fortnight past. Julian had not shown it to a soul. He had instead borrowed a groom's coat from the very back of the stores, given his own valet 3 days' leave to visit a sister who did not exist, and gone down among his own people as a man called Jack Elliot, newly hired, quiet, watchful, thinking, God help him. That he would know his enemy's face when he saw it, and not knowing, not yet. That he would instead find the opposite of an enemy in a girl who mended a stranger's ruin by lantern light and asked for nothing, and told no one and went home in the dark with her hands raw and her conscience entirely clean. He thought about her for 3 days before he did anything about it, which was, for a man as careful with himself as Julian Voss, very nearly no time at all. He learned her name first from Tam, who worshipped her the unguarded way children worship the first adult who has ever simply been kind to them without wanting a thing in return, and who told the new groom Jack, entirely without suspicion, that Miss Calloway from the village had saved him from a whipping and worse, though he did not, being 12 and frightened and sworn to silence. Say precisely how. Julian learnt the rest by asking the housekeeper, a broad, dry, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Pettigrew, who had run Farley Court through 2 dukes and buried one of them, and was not, in Julian's 8 months' experience of her, a woman easily deceived by a groom's coat, though she had the good sense, or the loyalty, to say nothing of what she suspected. The saddler's girl, she said when he asked, in the flat tone of a woman answering a question she found faintly beneath her notice. Orphan. Father dead 3 years. The shop gone to a cousin who'll not have her in it. She mends what's sent down to her, and she does it better than the man in Oldham proper, and charges half what he does, which I've told the steward is a foolish economy on our part, paying a craftsman's price for a woman's labour, but no one listens to me on the household accounts. She would not take more, Julian said, before he could stop himself. No, she said. I don't expect she would. He did not tell the housekeeper why he asked. He told her only, some days later, that the saddler's girl might be given regular work at the house, mending linens as well as tack, on a fair wage set by the steward, and not by what she would think to ask for herself, and Mrs. Pettigrew, who had buried one duke and outlasted a great many opinions in her time, only said very well, your grace, and did not so much as glance at the groom's coat he still, at that hour, happened to be wearing. Hester came up to Farley Court twice a week after that, on the strength of a note from the steward she did not entirely understand the reason for, and did not think to question. Because a poor woman does not question steady work, she only does it, and is grateful, and does not let the gratitude show too plainly, for fear it would be taken as forwardness. She sat in a small room off the laundry, with good light, and a stove that actually drew. And she mended what was brought to her, and more than once, crossing the yard or coming up from the stable with an armful of tack, she passed the new groom called Jack Elliot, who had a way of watching her that she did not at first think anything of, because men who were paid to notice horses noticed most things out of the same habit, and she did not imagine herself worth a second look from anyone. He spoke to her first on a wet Thursday, coming in out of the rain with his coat dark across the shoulders, to find her stitching a rein by the stove with her sleeves pushed back and her hands, for once, not cold. That'll hold better than the last man's work, he said, nodding at the rein. The last man did not know leather, she said. He only knew he was paid to touch it. And you know leather. She looked up at him properly then, for the first time, this new groom with the crooked nose and the watchful tea-coloured eyes, and something in her, some old habit of her father's, made her answer him plain, the way she would have answered anyone who asked her a true question, and seemed unusually to want a true answer back. I know it better than I know most people, she said. It doesn't lie to you if you know how to listen. He did not smile, but something in his face eased a little, the way stone eases under sun it has waited a long time for. "That's a rare gift," he said. "Most people can't be read at all, plain or otherwise. Most people don't want to be," she said. "It's safer, not being read." "Is it?" he said. It was not quite a question. She bent back to her work and did not answer that, because she had learned long ago that silence served her better than most speech did, and he did not press her, only stood a moment longer by the door, with the rain coming off his coat onto the flagstones, and then he went out again into the wet without another word, and she thought, watching him go, that there was something in him that sat oddly on a groom's coat. Some weight of thinking that a man paid to muck stalls should not, by rights, have had leisure to carry. She did not think much further on it than that. She had learned not to spend her thinking on men who were, in every practical sense, as far above her as the moon was above the mill-pond, and a groom, even a strange and watchful one, was still a man with a wage and a master. Same as she was a woman with a needle and a debt she was still, 3 years on, quietly paying down on her father's name. What she did not know, and would not know for some weeks, was that the doctor who came to see to Tam's chest that winter, when the boy took a wet cough that would not shift, and no one at Farley Court thought a stable boy's cough worth a physician's fee, had been sent and paid for by a man who left no name with the housekeeper, and asked only that none be given. She did not know that the debt still owing on her father's shop, a debt she believed was hers alone to carry, and mentioned to no living soul, had been quietly settled that same month by a solicitor in the county town, who wrote to the cousin holding the shop, and said only that an interested party wished the matter closed, no explanation offered, no name attached. She did not know, because she was not meant to know, because the man doing it had asked, each time, that his name be kept from it, the way he had asked once, of himself, in a letter he never signed and never sent to anyone but his own conscience, to be shown what a person was when they believed themselves entirely unwatched. She only knew that the debt seemed, mysteriously, to have righted itself, and that Tam's cough broke inside a week of a doctor's visit no one at the house would own to arranging, and she thought, the way a poor woman thinks of good fortune, that the world had for once simply been kind to her without asking why, and she was grateful, and she did not think to look for a hand behind it, because she had never in her life had reason to believe one might be there. The county assembled at Farley Court in the new year for the traditional hunt breakfast, the grey stallion by then well known and well admired the length of 3 parishes, and Hester came up that morning not to attend, because women of her station did not attend such things, but to deliver a set of mended reins to the tack-room before the guests arrived, and be gone again before anyone of consequence had cause to see her. She was not quite gone in time. Lord Edmund Voss came through the stable yard on his way to admire his cousin's horse, elegant in a driving coat the colour of good claret, and he found Hester in the doorway of the tack-room, with her bag over her shoulder, and her hands, as ever, stained faintly at the fingertips, and something in the sight of her, plain and poor and entirely unremarkable, seemed to strike him as an opportunity too good to let pass. "And who is this?" he said, to no one in particular, though Hester was the only one there to hear it. "The seamstress, is it? Or is there some grander word for mending horse straps?" "Saddler," she said, "my father's trade before mine." "Ah," he said, and let his eyes travel over her, unhurried, the particular insolence of a man accustomed to looking at what he pleased without consequence. "Your father's trade? And is that your father's coat as well, or did you come by it second-hand, as one does everything else in your position? She did not answer that. She had learned long ago that some questions were not questions at all, only knives dressed as manners, and the only defence against them was to decline to bleed where it showed. "Nothing to say," he said. "No matter. I don't suppose leather requires much conversation." "It requires honesty," she said. "More than most conversations do." For a moment something flickered across his handsome, cold face, there and gone, and he laughed, 3 practised beats, a sound like a small bell struck too hard. "How refreshing," he said. "The help with opinions. My cousin does collect the strangest staff." He went on into the yard to admire the horse, and Hester stood a moment in the doorway with her hands, she noted with some private satisfaction, entirely steady, and did not let the shake come until she was well down the lane toward the village, and certain no one of consequence could see it. She did not know that Julian, standing at the paddock rail in his groom's coat, not 20 feet distant, had heard every word of it, and that something in him, some old cold thing left over from a broken engagement and a lifetime of being looked past, had gone very still and very quiet in a way that boded no comfort at all for his cousin, though nothing showed on his face beyond what always showed there, which was very little. That evening, coming in from the stable in the last grey light, he found her by chance at the gate, later than usual, having stayed to finish a rein by lamplight rather than leave it half done. "You needn't mind him," he said, without preamble, knowing exactly whom he meant, and trusting she would know it too. "I don't," she said. "You do a little." She looked at him then, this groom who spoke to her as though he had some standing to comfort her, and something in his plain, grave, crooked face made her answer honestly, because she had found, in the weeks since the wet Thursday, that she could not seem to help it with him. "A little," she admitted. "Not for myself. I've been called worse and lived. For the boy, he hears it too, second hand, and takes it worse than I do." Julian said nothing to that for a moment, only looked at her with an expression she could not name, something between respect and a kind of hunger that was not the ordinary kind a man showed a woman, but the hunger of a man who has spent his whole life being disbelieved and has just, for the first time, watched someone refuse to be unkind, even when unkindness would have cost her nothing. "He is fortunate in you," he said finally. "I did nothing," she said. "Anyone would. Anyone did not," he said. "You did." She had no answer for that, and he did not press for one. And they stood a moment longer in the cold with the light going out of the sky, and then he touched his cap, the ordinary small courtesy of a groom to a woman he worked alongside, and went in, and she walked home turning his words over and over. Anyone did not. You did, and did not know why they sat in her chest, like a coal banked for warmth. Lord Edmund Voss was not in fact a man given to idle cruelty for its own pleasure only. He was a man with a debt of his own, considerable and pressing, and a conviction, nursed across 8 bitter months, that the dukedom sat on his cousin like a coat-cut for another man's shoulders, and that fate, or something a good deal less patient than fate, ought to be encouraged to correct the error. He had paid a groom named Silas, who liked coin better than he liked honesty, to see that the new stallion's girth failed at the worst possible moment of the hunt, a fall at speed over broken ground being, in Edmund's careful calculation, precisely the sort of accident no one would ever think to call anything but bad luck. That the horse had gone the whole hunt sound, and his cousin had come home unbruised and ungrateful and entirely unaware of how close he had ridden to his own funeral, had struck Edmund at the time as simple ill chance, the kind of thing a careful man learns to shrug off and try again. It did not occur to him, not for some weeks, to wonder how a strap he had watched Silas cut with his own eyes could have held an entire hard ride over hedge and ditch without failing. It occurred to Silas first, in his cups, complaining to a stable hand about wasted work, that the girth he'd fixed had somehow mysteriously mended itself overnight, and the stable hand, who had no love for Silas and less for keeping secrets that were not his own, mentioned it in passing to Tam, who went white and said nothing, and Tam's silence was, to a boy of 12 unused to guarding anything, so loud and so obvious that Silas noticed it, and put it together, and went, greedy for a second payment, on the same wretched work, to Lord Edmund Voss with the tale entire. That the saddler's girl had found the cut strap, that she had mended it herself, told no one, and let the hunt ride out none the wiser. Edmund's first thought, sitting with the knowledge like a stone in his gut, was that she must be silenced, or bought, or both. His second thought, arriving a moment later, and considerably more useful to him, was that a poor woman caught tampering with a duke's tack, for whatever reason, however good, was a woman easily made to look like the author of the crime rather than its prevention, if a man of rank simply said so first, and said so loudly. He went to the steward within the week, and laid an accusation entire and false, that the saddler's girl Hester Calloway had been seen interfering with the Duke's tack under cover of darkness, that her motives were unknown, and her honesty, given her poverty and her father's unpaid debts, hardly to be relied upon, that Farley Court could not in conscience continue to employ a woman under such a cloud. He said nothing of the cut. He said nothing of Silas. He was careful, cold, and entirely convincing, and the steward, who did not know the Duke was at that hour dressed as his own groom not 30 yards distant, and hearing every word of it through a half-open door, took the accusation for what it appeared to be, and sent word that Hester Calloway's services would no longer be required at Farley Court. She received the message on a grey Tuesday from a boy sent down from the house, a folded note in the steward's hand, brief and cold, thanking her for past service and regretting that circumstances no longer permitted her continued employment. No reason given. No chance to answer it. She sat a long while with the note in her lap before she understood, from the shape of the silence around it, that it was not an ordinary dismissal, that something had been said against her that she was not to be told, and could not therefore defend herself from, and the understanding settled into her the way cold settles into stone. Slow and total and impossible to argue with. She did not go up to the house to ask why. She had her pride, what little of it poverty had left her, and she would not beg an explanation from people who had already decided, without troubling to ask her, what kind of woman she was. She thought of Tam, and of what might happen to a boy already frightened and already guilty of nothing. If the cloud settling over her name reached far enough to touch his, and she thought that the kindest thing she could do, the only thing left in her power to do, was to remove herself entirely, quietly, without a fight that might drag his name into it after hers. She wrote no letter of protest. She sent no message asking for the groom called Jack, though some part of her, small and unexamined, wanted very much to send for him, and did not know why, and told herself firmly that it was not her place, and never had been. She stopped going up to Farley Court. She sat again at her own window in the village, mending what little work still came to her, and told herself this was no worse than she had lived through before, and found, to her own surprise, that it was. Julian learned of the dismissal within the hour, and learned within the hour after that exactly whose word had procured it, and something in him that had been carefully, deliberately banked for 8 months, waiting, watching, doing its patient sums, came very close that evening to burning the coat off his own back. He did not act on it at once. He was not, whatever his cousin believed of him, a careless man, and he understood that an accusation answered with rage would only look, to anyone watching, like the guilty defending the guilty. He went instead to Mrs. Pettigrew, and told her, for the first time plainly, who he was and what he had been doing in a groom's coat for 2 months, and asked her what she knew of Hester Calloway that the world did not. Mrs. Pettigrew, who had suspected the truth of him for a good 6 weeks and said nothing out of a housekeeper's ancient discretion, looked at her Duke for a long moment and then said, in the dry voice she used for things that mattered most to her, that she had known the girl's father, and known the girl since she was in short skirts mending her own doll's harness for practice, and that in 25 years she had never once known Hester Calloway to take a thing that was not hers, nor to lie about a thing that was, nor to accept a kindness without trying to repay it threefold, which was, Mrs. Pettigrew said, rather more of a fault in her than a virtue, if his Grace wanted her honest opinion. And the debt on her father's shop, Julian said. Does she know who settled it? She does not, said Mrs. Pettigrew, and then, watching his face, she does not know you did it either, your Grace. If that is what you are working yourself toward asking. He did not answer that directly. He asked instead, quietly, what she knew of the accusation against the girl, and Mrs. Pettigrew, who had her own sources below stairs, and had already put together a good deal more than the steward had troubled to, told him what she had pieced from the servants' hall, that Silas had been paid, that the strap had been cut, that a boy called Tam knew more than he had told, and that Lord Edmund Voss had been observed in low conversation with Silas on no fewer than 3 occasions in the fortnight before the hunt. Julian sat with that a long while in silence, and Mrs. Pettigrew, who had raised no children of her own, but had watched a great many young men grow into the weight of their names, recognised the particular stillness in him as the stillness of a man deciding finally to stop watching and start acting. He did not go to his cousin first. He went, the next morning, in his own clothes and his own name, in the Farley carriage with the Farley crest on the door, down the 2 miles to the village, and knocked at Hester Calloway's own narrow door himself, and stood on her step in the cold like any ordinary caller, and waited for her to open it. She opened the door and found the Duke of Farley standing on her step, and for one long unsteady moment she did not understand what she was looking at, because the face was the face of the groom called Jack Elliot, the crooked nose and the watchful tea-coloured eyes exactly the same, only now dressed in a coat that told the truth of him at last, and something in her went cold and then very still, the particular stillness of a woman realizing she has been, in some sense she could not yet fully measure, deceived. You, she said. Me, he said. May I come in? She did not move from the doorway at once. Her hands, he noticed, were not shaking. They were, if anything, more still than he had ever seen them, folded very deliberately in front of her, and he understood, watching her, that stillness in Hester Calloway was not calm. It was control, held at considerable cost. You lied to me, she said, every day for 2 months. You let me think you a groom. I did, he said. Why? Because someone close to me wants me dead, he said plainly, without softening it, and I did not know who, and I could not find out by asking, because a man asked will always answer what he wishes you to hear. I could only find out by watching who was kind, when they believed no rank was watching them do it. That is the only test that ever tells the truth. She stood very still in her own doorway, turning that over, and behind the cold in her there was something else beginning, some old ember she did not yet trust herself to name. "And what did you see?" she said, when you watched. He did not answer her at once. He asked, instead, if he might come in out of the cold, because what he had to say deserved more than a doorstep, and she stood aside. At last, and let him. Her front room was small and clean, and smelled of leather and tallow, and faintly of the herbs she dried above the hearth, and he stood in the middle of it feeling, for the first time in 8 months, of wearing a title he had not asked for, entirely without the armour of it. "I saw a girl mend a stranger's ruin by lantern light," he said, "and take no credit for it, and let a frightened boy sleep easy while she carried the weight of it herself. I saw her insulted to her face by a man who outranked her in nothing but birth, and answer him with more dignity than I have managed in most of my dealings with him myself. I saw her dismissed on a lie, and go quietly rather than drag a child's name down with a fight for her own. I have watched a great many people in my life perform their better selves for my benefit, Miss Calloway, because they knew who I was and what I could do for them. I had never, before you, watched anyone be good for no one at all." She sat down slowly in the chair by the cold hearth, because her legs did not seem entirely willing to hold her, and he did not move to help her, only waited, the way she had noticed he always waited, with a patience that asked nothing. "The strap," she said. "That was Edmund. It was," he said, "and Silas paid to cut it. I have both admissions in writing now, taken this morning before witnesses, and my cousin will not trouble Farley Court again. He leaves for the continent within the fortnight, on an income sufficient to keep him from want, and insufficient to keep him from feeling the loss of everything else. The steward has been told the truth of your dismissal, and will write you an apology by this evening, though I imagine you will find that a poor sort of currency, after what it cost you." She looked at her own hands in her lap, remembering the shake she had not let anyone see, on the lane after Edmund's laugh, on the step after the note came. "You could have told me who you were," she said at the start. "I could have," he said. "I did not, because I have been lied to by people who wanted something from my rank, and I did not know, at the start, whether you would be one of them. I was wrong to let it run so long once I knew you were not. I am sorry for the length of it, if not for the beginning." She was quiet a long moment, and the fire in the hearth, unlit, gave neither of them anything to watch but each other, and she found, looking at him, that the anger in her, real as it had been, was already burning down to something else, something that had been building, unnamed, since a wet Thursday and a rain by the stove. "Why did you settle my father's debt?" she said. "Why the doctor for Tam, if you meant only to watch me and be done?" "Because I could not simply watch and do nothing," he said. "I told myself it was to see if you would notice, if you would ask after the giver and try to repay him and prove yourself. In the end, no different from anyone else angling for a duke's favour. You never asked. You never even suspected a hand behind it. I kept doing it anyway after that because I found I wanted to." "Wanted to," she repeated. "I am not skilled at saying this plainly," he said, and something in his grave, crooked face eased into what was, for him, very nearly a smile, unpractised and entirely without art. "I have spent 8 months learning that most kindness shown to me is a kind of coin, spent in the hope of being repaid. Yours was not. I do not know how to want anything from a person the way I find I want things from you, without it curdling into exactly the sort of transaction I despise. So I am asking you to tell me what you would have of me, freely, and I will not press you for an answer before you are ready to give one honestly." She looked at him a long moment, this man who had watched her from a hayloft and paid her debts in secret, and stood now in her poor front room asking of all things to be told what she wanted, as though her wanting mattered as much as his. "I would have the truth from you, always," she said. "I have had enough of being managed kindly by people who thought they knew better than to tell me plainly what they were about. I would rather be told a hard thing straight than a soft thing sideways." "You shall have it," he said. "Always. That much I can promise without asking you to promise anything back." She almost smiled then, the first real ease in her face since he had knocked. "And what else?" she said. "You said you would not press. That sounds a great deal like a man leaving room for a longer list." "There is a longer list," he said, "but I find I am content to let it wait for spring, if you will let me call again before then, and let me be Jack a little longer in your company, since I find I liked being him rather better than I have ever liked being what I am." "You cannot be Jack," she said. "Jack does not exist. You only wore him. Then let me be Julian," he said. "No one has called me that since my uncle died. It would be a kindness if you were willing." "Julian," she said, testing the shape of it, and something in him, watching her say his own true name for the first time, felt more thoroughly known than he had in 8 months of being addressed by his title 50 times a day by people who did not know him at all. He called again before spring, more than once, and each time he came in his own name and his own coat, and each time he asked nothing of her beyond her company and her plain speech. And the county, which had at first buzzed over the scandal of Lord Edmund's disgrace and the mystery of his sudden departure, began, by slow degrees, to buzz instead over the sight of the Duke of Farles's carriage standing regularly outside the saddler's narrow door in the village. It was in March, with the first thaw softening the lane and the rooks noisy in the elms behind the church, that he asked her properly, in her own front room again, with the fire lit this time, and drawing well. "I will not ask you to answer me tonight," he said. "I would rather have your no honestly given than a yes you felt cornered into by my rank or my patience. I will ask again in a month if you like, or a season, and your answer will be no less welcome to me whenever it comes plain and true. But I will tell you now, so there is no mistaking it, that I want you for my wife, not for what you did for me in a stable in the dark, though I will never forget it, but for the plain fact of who you have shown yourself to be in every hour since, watched or unwatched, angry or glad. I have never in my life trusted anyone the way I trust you, and I do not offer that lightly, having so little practice giving it away." She sat with her hands folded in her lap, steady now, entirely steady, and she found that she did not need a month or a season to know her own mind, because she had known it, she realised, since a wet Thursday when a groom told her that not being read was safer, and she had answered him honestly anyway, because some part of her had already decided he was worth the risk of being known. "Yes," she said. "It is the only word I need to give you." He crossed the small room to her chair and knelt, which a duke had no earthly need to do for a saddler's daughter, and did anyway, and drew the glove from her right hand himself, finger by finger, slow and careful, the way she drew thread through good leather, and pressed his mouth to her bare knuckles, to the calluses and the old needle scars there. as though they were the finest thing he had ever been given the honour of touching, which in every way that mattered to him they were. "Thank you," he said. Against her hand. "For what?" she said. "You have thanked me for nothing in particular 12 times now, and never once said what for. For being exactly what you were when you thought no one of consequence was watching," he said. "It is the only gift I have ever trusted completely." "Then thank you as well," she said, "for watching long enough to see it, and not turning away." They were married that June in the small stone church at Alden Hollow, quietly, by his particular wish and hers, a duke's wedding made grand only by the single fact of who stood at the altar, and not by any pomp either of them wanted. And Mrs. Pettigrew wept without shame through the whole of it, and told anyone who would listen afterward that she had known it from the very first week the new groom couldn't keep his eyes off the mending room. Lord Edmund Voss lived out his exile on the continent on the income his cousin's mercy allowed him, and wrote, twice, letters full of grievance and self-justification, and both letters were burned unread, at Julian's order, by a housekeeper who considered it no loss to the world whatsoever. Silas was turned off Farley Court without a character, and was not heard of in the county again. Tam Fenwick was kept on at the stables, properly apprenticed this time, with his letters taught him besides by Hester herself of an evening, and grew, in time, into a quiet, steady young man, with his own gift for horses, and no memory of childhood so sharp as the night a saddler's daughter told him she believed him, and meant it. A year later, almost to the week, Hester stood again in the stable at Farley Court, in the last light of a winter afternoon, her hand resting on the grey stallion's neck, the same horse, older now and calmer, who had carried her husband safely over 11 fences on a strap she had mended by lantern light. Julian came in from the cold and found her there, and did not speak at once, only crossed to stand beside her, and took her bare hand in his, ungloved, and their fingers laced together the way they had laced together 100 times since that March evening, and did not let go. On the wall above the tack pegs, framed now behind glass at Hester's own quiet insistence, hung the very strap she had spliced that first night, the mend still visible if you knew where to look, kept not as a trophy, but as a plain reminder of the thing it had taught them both, that the truest test of any soul is not what it does when it is watched and praised for watching, but what it does in the dark, expecting nothing, when it believes itself entirely alone. Character, the old saddler's daughter used to tell her own children in years after, is only what you do when you are certain no one of consequence is looking. Everything else is only manners. What a journey it has been, watching Hester's quiet honesty outlast every lie told against her, and watching a duke learn that the truest proof of a person's worth is never the thing they show you, but the thing they never meant for you to see at all. If this story moved you, I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. I would also love to know, in the comments, what you think you would have done in Hester's place that night in the stable. Would you have stayed silent and mended the strap yourself, the way she did? Or would you have raised the alarm and let the consequences fall where they may? Tell me honestly, I read every one. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to its quiet, hard-won ending. Until the next tale finds you, take care of yourselves, and remember that the truest kindness is always the kind no one ever sees.